Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Single best idea. Thank you for the response. I'm really humbled. It's just amazing. I thought it would take months and months and months to chart, and we actually are charting within the podcast world, and I really don't understand the new podcast world. You know, Joe Rogan is no threat for me. I'm just not going to do a Joe Rogan on you. But I'm just humbled by the charting that we see. We're under business and business news at Apple Podcast. We're working our way forward. Where'd you get the photo of me on the chiclet? Was that the police lineup in 1973? Something like that. Anyways, we're having fun with Single Best Idea. What is it? It's 2 ideas from a 3-hour show. I do some chit-chat on it. It's 6 or 7 minutes to add to your busy Apple Podcast day. Charlie Clough is a legend. We'll talk about that in a moment. But we had another legend in today. Chris Whalen, I'm going to say a decade ago, 12 years ago, wrote a single volume called Inflated. And it was a tour de force financial history of the United States of America. He's in heavy rewrite on it right now. This fall, we will see a new Inflated from Chris Whalen. It'll be an immediate required read by Global Wall Street. And he's been on fire. You know him out on Twitter with all he's doing. And he's been absolute on fire on banking safety, on commercial real estate, and the rest. Here is Christopher Whalen of Whalen Global. Here he is on You Gotta Buy the Biggest, Best Stocks.
The way I look at banks, we published some bank indices earlier this year, and we weighted quality versus size. Now, you can't ignore size, but my attitude is if you want to be safe with banks, you want to own the top 25 out of the top 100. So that's a pretty harsh cut. But whether you care about income or alpha, you want to know where the good ones are. And so, for example, we just wrote a piece about Banco ZK, George Gleason. Well, George is a little bank, but he produces a lot of construction and development loans. People make the mistake of thinking he's in commercial real estate lending. He's not. He lends in the beginning of the life cycle of the asset, then he gets out. Very smart.
Chris Whalen there. Damien Sassar helping out here on a Friday. We tried to get Katie Greifeld in, but it was something about the horse. I don't know, the horse or whatever. And Paul Sweeney's got the Gulfstream. So we had Damien Sassar. And, of course, the markets are really on the move. We had a huge jump condition on the geopolitics. Brent crude out to 92, a print of 92 DXY through 106, shows stronger, resilient U.S. dollars, something that Mr. Whalen spoke about. And it synthesizes how we invented Bloomberg Surveillance. So how do we do that? We did it off the legends. Trust me, folks, I was stealing from everybody every day. Ed Hyman at C.J. Lawrence. Ed Yardeni as well at C.J. Lawrence. A guy named Ferro at Merrill Lynch with a young Turk, David Rosenberg, and Richard Bernstein at Merrill Lynch. So you say, well, that's all great, but where was this invented? Charles Clough is a giant. And right now it's like we really want to hear from Charlie Clough. He wants you to be in the market. He wants to participate with the new productivity of the American experiment. But more than anything, it's Charlie Clough saying, try to remove yourself from the strategy babble and get back to first principles. Here's Charles Clough on productivity.
I think there's two things that really prop up equities as we look through the rest of the decade. And of course, I'm looking beyond this. One is productivity. Productivity is clearly driving profits. And disinflation, which has been going on for 40 years, it was interrupted a bit by the COVID response and the liquidity that was thrown into the economy from that standpoint. But I think when you look at how things look longer term, remember, interest rates and inflation came down for 40 years. And then, of course, COVID interrupted. So the question is, what were the reasons they came down? Yeah. And are those reasons still good? And I think the reasons are largely demographics, what balance sheets look like in the private sector, which are still pretty large and heavily liability oriented. And thirdly, productivity. Those are still there. So we think that disinflation and interest rates continues.
Charles Clough, forever of Boston and Colonial Group. Charles Clough, always with Merrill Lynch. I want to point out two different kinds of interview contrasts on Bloomberg Surveillance this week. The first one is at Gina Martin Adams of Bloomberg Intelligence. She was on fire yesterday, using fundamental and technical analysis to say she's really not sure about the banks. And we saw J.P. Morgan trade off here over 2 standard deviations this morning. And at the same time, you've got someone like Chris Whalen saying, we're really not sure about the banks, coming from a totally different world. And I think this is really important to listen to different kinds of guests and whether they come to the same conclusion. And the other way to look at this, as we saw yesterday on Single Best Idea, is Dennis Gartman and Ian Lingen coming to a completely opposite conclusion of where the 10-year yield will go and what rates will do, and of course what the 30-year mortgage will do. Gartman's looking for some persistency of higher rates, if indeed a breakthrough out to some new regime of higher rates. And Ian Lingen's got the call of the year if it happens out. He looks for the 10-year yield to drive under 4%. It's been a wonderful week. Thanks to the surveillance team. And all I can say is Single Best Idea. Look for us on Apple CarPlay, on YouTube under Bloomberg Podcasts, and Single Best Idea always on Apple Podcasts.